You're listening to the Facetime with Scientists podcast, where we go into the lab or into the field to learn from scientists about their lives, their work, their struggles, and their joy. Let's go. I'm here today with Dr. Jane Waters. You're a biology professor at Providence College, and I've already heard about you. Your name has already been mentioned on the podcast. A few weeks ago, I talked with a science artist who does a lot of entomology art, insect art, and has been to some of your bio blitzes and I think has visited your lab, Manuela Guzman. And she was raving about the ant lab at Providence College. So I'm super excited to talk about ants and ant biology today.
Thanks so much, Paige. This is the Ant
Yay!
Lab. Welcome.
Awesome. So can you tell us a little bit about what we're seeing today? So you actually have some ants
Oh
in
yeah,
front of
people
us?
are
Yeah.
like seeing the ants like right now.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So this is in the Ant Lab, we do a mix of work outside in the field, and we do experiments and observations and have lots of fun with ants here in our lab. We're at Providence College. It's a mostly undergraduate institution that we do sometimes have lab managers and postdocs here on campus also, and I've been lucky enough to have some of those in this lab. But we usually have like 5 or 6 undergraduates in the lab, each of which pick a little project to work on and can work on it anywhere from like 1 to 4 years. Um, and so these are all pieces of student projects. I don't have any students with me on campus today, but I'm going to try to do my best to share some of what we do here. So right now, this is a fun colony. These are pretty big ants. These are they're Camponotus ants. They're in the same family of ants as the sort of large black carpenter ants that some people aren't huge fans of in their homes. But I think that they're beautiful. They you can see the queen, I think, or at one point we could see the queen. Let's see if she's still in there. Um, Actually, I'm not sure we can easily see the queen right now. Oh no, there she is. She's absolutely right there. She's enormous. How did I miss her?
Uh,
And so you can tell that it's the queen, not just because she's bigger in this species. She's a lot bigger than the workers in other species. Um, she's only a little bit bigger, but her thorax, so in the 3 body sections, like the head, thorax, abdomen, um, uh, queens have really muscular thoraxes. So really big, boxy relative to sort of the more curvy and slender thorax of workers. And the
oh,
reason it's big and boxy in most ant queens is because they needed room for a flight muscle. And for the most part, most of their daughters won't fly. So they don't have that sort of like investment in muscle. But when the queen starts a new colony, she'll rip her wings off, and ripping the wings off is a trigger that causes the cells of the flight muscle to autolyse and then break down because she's not going to fly again. And then energy goes into the hemolymph and goes into the ovaries, so the ovarials, so that they can lay a whole bunch of eggs and provision those early workers until you've got hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of ants in the colony.
that is so cool. I mean, I've always been fascinated with ants. I feel like a lot of people, when they're growing up, if they've been into bugs at all, I feel like ants are a good segue. They're not like scare. I mean, they're not like a
Here's the thing,
spider or
like,
really
at some
gross
point,
bug.
people get scared of spiders and bugs, but, these ants don't have a stinger. They can spray formic acid, but, unless you have them, like, up in your nose and mouth area, you're not going to really even smell the formic acid. Some of the bigger ones, like these, could potentially grab some skin if they bit, but, most of the time, they're not too eager to mess with us. But if I could show you an ant, another ant that people in New England and across the country are actually really scared of right now. I'm not, but they get in headlines all of the time. And I literally just picked these two up on the way into campus this morning.
Oh, I think I know because I looked up something about needle ants
Yeah,
on your lab
yeah,
website.
this is the super, super scary needle ant. Let me give me a second. I'm just going to zoom in here a little bit so we can get a closer look at her.
And I love this because, well, in Louisiana, or I live in Louisiana normally, and we have the fire ants there, right? Which is like maybe this one is kind of compared to fire ants in terms of yeah, maybe it doesn't feel so good if it
W
stings you.
Yeah, no, I worked with fire ants once. We have a setup in the back of the lab over there to measure the gas exchange characteristics of ants. So how much oxygen they consume and how much carbon dioxide they breathe. We do that so that we can measure their energy use and understand how behavior and physiology are interrelated within the colony. And I've worked with so many different ants here. I think I can just get those in focus, get that one in focus. And we can keep the ants in little containers. This is like an example of one of them, or we can like watch what they're doing and control the flow of air around them.
Hmm.
It's fun work, and it's always gone really well, except the one time I worked with a friend of mine, Clint Pennick, and we did a project with fire ants in the respirometer, and they pulled this stainless steel mesh off of the thing that they were held in, and they got out and they got into the analyzer, and yeah, it took weeks to fix.
Oh no, fire ants,
Sorry,
yeah,
yeah, sorry for your
they're tricky. They're tricky like that.
Yes, I'm here in Rhode Island. I'm in New England. This ant, this is called Brachyponera chinensis. It was previously called Pachycondyla chinensis. It's a needle ant, and it's not originally from this continent. It has origins in Asia. It probably made it to this part of the world, maybe 1930s, 1950s, setting up in the Mid-Atlantic area. And they've been a concern for ecologists because where their numbers have boomed, we've seen declines in other ant species biodiversity. So it does seem like where they travel, we lose other ants. Now, a student in my Gen Bio class, Zach Howland, located the first colony here on campus in, I want to say, around 2016. And then, we were faced with a little bit of an ethical question about what to do with them. Um, I'm not a fan of killing things or killing insects in general, so I didn't want to exterminate them, though some of my colleagues did say that that would have been the ethical thing to do. Um, so we kept an eye on them and monitored the fact that over a decade they never spread. They made it from one corner of a building maybe to the corner of the adjacent building. And so I really wasn't worried about their spread, mostly just curious about why they were here, how they got here, what was the ecology, excuse me, of our local habitat that was helping them do well. Um, another colony was found somewhere in Massachusetts. A few years after we found the one here. I don't know if those are related necessarily, or if those are independent introductions to the New England region. When media talks about this ant, though, they use its technically current official name, which is the Asian needle ant, because that was the name given to it. And they always spread terror and fear that the invasive Asian needle ant is going to come and destroy your summer. And they get headline articles, hundreds of newspapers, and like even CBS Boston ran like a 5-minute piece because someone thought they got stung by one while cleaning their swimming pool last summer. And then they
Wow.
held up a picture of the previous ant I was showing you, the Carpenter ants, and it was just absolutely ridiculous. Especially because even though they have a sting, it doesn't hurt. If you're allergic to venom, insect venom, it is a genuine danger, but that is the
Right.
case for anyone who is allergic to anything. It feels like a little needle prick at the most. And I don't think I can sting myself on camera, although I'm absolutely, well, like, if you want to see it at the end, we can totally.
Yeah.
But the hardest thing about getting them to sting you is that they don't want to. And like if I have to hold up my arm and I'll press one into my arm and I'll have to like really
Wow.
anger her to get her to sting me. And in general, we've been watching them and studying their biology, and they're a pretty gentle ant. They're also a beautiful ant, and we found that they're doing a really interesting behavior. And so I have one in that petri dish, and from the same nest, here's another. And if this works, I'm going to try to take the lid off and then put them together. One of the things we study in the lab is how social insect colonies organize their behavior. Oh, I dropped her. Okay, here we go. And one of the ways they do it is by communicating with each other through interactions. And they'll make antennal contact. And they're doing it right now.
Oh my
Right now. Oh
gosh.
my gosh. I didn't even have a chance to focus it. Okay. When they bumped into each other, they're doing this thing with their
Yeah.
antennae where they're
Yeah.
wiggling their antennae into each other. They're smelling each other. They're trying to figure out, hey, who are you? Who was your mom? Or do we have the same mom? Are we cool with each other right now? And they are, because they are from the same colony. But here's the crazy thing about these ants. So normally when two ants, like outside in the nest, run by each other, a lot of the times they give each other a high five. They do like a brief, like little, like, I'm going to tap your head or I'm going to tap your butt. And it's their way of quickly like figuring out what behavior was that ant up to. Should I change my behavior? When these ants encounter each other, sometimes they do that. They do that brief like high five and move on interaction. Sometimes they do this long embrace where maybe even 20 times a second, they are going to like tap each other on the forehead with their antennae. And in other ants, people have described something called antennal drumming. It can be used as a ritualistic form of combat, or it could be used to solicit trophallaxis, passing food between workers. We don't know what these ants are doing or what they're trying to communicate or what that communication behavior means. One of the students who worked on this with us a while ago, Darylise Cruz, she noticed one really important biological thing was that they or ecological rather, is that they tended where their nest was found on campus was a really humid spot. There was basically a leaky valve that was causing the ground to be pretty wet and warm, and we think that might be one of the reasons that they were hanging out with us on campus for a while. And then the other thing she did is she called the long, fast interaction between these two workers a vibe check. And so if we ever get this paper published, we're going to hope to turn vibe check into a formal scientific term.
That is so amazing.
Hopefully also explaining what it is they're doing,
Right.
and what kind of information they're interested in getting. Yeah.
That is so cool. So, I mean, I've looked a little bit at some of your research papers in your lab, and you often study, yeah, insect communication, but also kind of this idea that ants work as like a superorganism, very much kind of mass behavior. And yeah, I wrote down some notes to ask you about some very interesting aspects of that. But yeah, can you talk a little bit more about, what it is that ants are doing when they're doing this communication and why? Or, I mean, you don't know for specifically for these, but in general, like, why do ants, yeah, what's special about ants, I guess, in terms of this communication that they do?
Yeah, so they're living in a colony, and there could be, like I said, tens, hundreds, thousands of individuals within the colony. And one of the things that folks have observed is as colonies um, grow past certain sizes, a division of labor emerges where you can get task differentiation. Um, that task differentiation can also lead to like spatial organization patterns, and all of the behaviors of the colony are self-organized. There's no hierarchy in an ant colony as far as the regulation of behavior or activity goes. We use the word queen to refer to the mother, who's really, once the colony is established, just an egg-laying machine. In fact, she works at the light of her daughters. The daughters will feed her, and based on how much and what they feed her, it's going to determine like her egg laying frequency. She's going to go where the workers tell them to go. Her smell is important, and they all share that smell, that chemical information. But the design of the nests that they excavate, the choice of which direction to forage in, whether to go to battle or not with another colony, those are all decisions made in a non-hierarchical, self-organized way by the workers. And so they need communication mechanisms to generate that sort of organized behavior. and we say ant colonies are examples of self-organized, complex adaptive systems. But basically what it means is like each individual ant can be kind of stupid. They can have access to only very limited information, but because they interact with each other, that global information can make the colony as a whole very responsive. There's some really great psychology studies with ants that show how they can learn things, how they can remember things, even how ants can make ant colonies rather can make rational decisions in a way individual ants can't, or even people like you or I would fall prey to. Um,
So yeah, I think it spurred a thought. I feel like there's a study where they like had humans trying to get like a piece through a puzzle, basically like
I saw
a
that.
weird
That was
fit,
going
and then
around.
they had ants do it, right? And
Yeah,
then the ants did better than humans.
I don't know. I started in grad school. One of the early questions I asked was to ask about when I thought it might be curious to think about colony intelligence and the intelligence of the whole colony, how that would be affected by evolution or colony size. And a lot of my committee members cast out on that line of study just because it's really hard to define intelligence. Just the same way standardized tests that we take only show how good we are at taking that standardized test.
Right.
Whatever little game we develop for the ants to perform in is, that may or may not be an intrinsically valuable thing for the colony.
Right.
But at least within ants, scientifically, what we can demonstrate is that like an individual ant maybe can't solve this problem or isn't like an individual ant can't exhibit division of labor on its own, but we can look at how something like division of labor emerges at like higher scales when you have the interactions between ants, and that's fun.
Yeah. That's super cool. Yeah, I saw one of your studies, and I don't know if this will be an aside, but I thought it was really interesting that you kind of studied collective, we call it social contagion in ants. And I didn't quite understand the study, so you'll have to explain it. But what I took from it was that, like humans, we have this tendency to like maybe we all like if we see someone looking up at a window or whatever, it's a very human thing to like everybody looks up, right? Or like
Yeah.
everybody panics or stampedes or something. And that
Yeah.
you actually found that ants maybe are somewhat immune to some of these, like they work as a group, as like this mass collective, but maybe they have some ways to not all panic or not all do the same
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. I'm going to swap these ants for another ant. Um, so these ants right now, they have, they're in a little artificial nest and they have a piece of red film over them. It sort of helps them relax, but, they'll forgive me, I hope, if I take that off for a moment. These are one of my favorite ants. These are acorn ants. Their scientific name. These are Temnothorax curvispinosus, and the whole colony lives inside an acorn. So this one's kind of small, and actually, I don't think we have a queen in this colony, sadly. But you can see workers. You can see some of their babies, the brood, the eggs, and the larvae beneath them. We picked this colony up last week, and I love that you can find an entire colony living inside a hollow acorn. It makes it fun and easy to collect these. But if we just look at them for a moment, like there's really only one or two of them moving around, and we might see them make antennal contacts with each other occasionally, but not much. So some funny things that we just observed by looking at these is that their tempo, their pace of movement is definitely not what you expected based on like your experience with fire ants in the South. Those
Right.
are super high tempo ants running all over the place when they're disturbed. And here we've got a colony of ants, and they're mostly just chilling. They're hanging out. They're keeping their babies company. And a few of them, there are more moving than there should be right now because I removed their red filter and the light is upsetting to them a little bit. Um, so they're not moving around all the time. Ants aren't always busy. There's a large chunk of most ant colonies that we've looked at that is just hanging out. What that means is we're finding different answers in different species, but just from the sort of like question about restraint and social interaction, um, for any network, any social network, a network of neurons in our brain, connections between cells, or interactions between ants. Mathematically speaking, as the number of entities in the network increases, whether it's cells, neurons, ants, people, as the number of those entities increases, the number of possible connections between them increases with the square of that number. So anytime you have like growth in a system, the potential for complexity, the potential for lots more interactions is increasing exponentially faster than the
Mm.
size of the group. In our own development, our brains go through, the neurons in our brain go through a process of pruning, synaptic pruning, so that the synapses are the connections between our neurons. But all of our neurons are not connected to all of our other neurons. That would be a very dysfunctional system.
Right.
A single sensory stimulus could set your brain on fire. And so our synapses are pruned to have a low connection density. And we find examples of the sort of low connection density sometimes in social insects, where a lot of people who model interactions in social insects might want to say if two ants are close to each other, they're interacting. Um, these ants are alive. Like, they can
Right.
smell each other. They know they're there, but they're not actually interacting just because they're close together.
Right.
And not only that, but they are not using all of the space available to them. This small, relatively small group of ants has this like, a nest about that big. They're not spread out. They're not all moving about. They've got this spatial cohesion that's holding them together, and then a sort of like behavioral restraint, so that one possibility, we have not proven this at all, but one possibility is that by exercising restraint in their interactions with each other, it can help prevent like unnecessary stimuli from triggering an alarm response in the colony or making the performance of other tasks less efficient.
That's super cool. Yeah, I didn't think about it as like, I mean, literally like a brain. Yeah, we in our brain we do have, or I think there's even diseases or things like stroke where it's like you'll have hyper excitability where things are interacting too much, and there's actually important aspects like you said where neurons will kind of quiet another neuron, and that's very important. The fact that like the ant colony is kind of working like that as opposed to like a group of people. We all have brains, but sometimes a group of people acts very dumb. Cause like
Yeah,
we're not having that maybe like quiet, like, no, no, shush, shush, no, it's okay, don't panic.
I think I was talking to a friend of mine about this the other day, just thinking about how people interact, and this is probably important that like people don't all interact with each other the same way. I grew up in Queens and went to school in New York City, and when you have 100 people or so on a subway car, they can be really smashed next to each other, but we don't interact.
Right.
Like, we generally don't make eye contact with each other. We generally read our book or watch our phone and get through the subway without interaction. And I don't know that like 100 people from another city all smushed together in the same car would be similarly quiet. And so there could be room for like evolution or development, like social norms within ants or people that help like basically set the pace of how we communicate with each other
Yeah.
and what happens when we're in settings. Even, we're talking about just like hanging out on the train, not any sort of
Right.
stimulus or anything really to respond to.
That's super cool.
So
Like
can I
maybe
tell you
yeah,
another
go ahead.
story about
Yeah.
these ants? Uh, so these are delightful little ants. They don't bite. I don't think they can sting. They have a stinger. They're too small. They weigh about 0.2 of a milligram each, 2 or 3 millimeters long. They're sweet little ants, and they are living in their acorn. And one of their sister taxa, so like a sister species to them, does a very sneaky thing. They will go into this nest, scare away all the workers, and run off with the babies. And when they get the babies back to their nest, those babies will grow up with the smell of that species' queen, of that species' workers. The workers that were the babies that were stolen once they become adults, they could spend the rest of their life doing work, raising the kids, taking care of the queen, the nest, all of that activity, all of that for another species. And
Wow.
it's that chemical communication of the ants that the first species takes advantage of. It exploits to parasitize the other species. And when we were out looking for these ants the other day, I think we found an acorn that has that happening in it. Like I think it's in this box.
Wow.
Do you want to take a look?
Yes.
Okay.
It reminds me of like, so once upon a time I had talked to Dr. Corey Morrow, I think, because I was doing a story on like the zombie ants. This is
Yes,
like a
Corey
long
is an
time ago.
absolute heroine of mine. Like,
Yes, I
yeah,
remember a long time ago, and like I fell in love with ants from that point of like this idea that it had, yeah, the zombie behavior of like the fungus working on the ants, and I was like, this is so fascinating,
yeah.
like scary and fast. I mean, it literally is the inspiration, I think, for a lot of zombie films, right?
And Corey gave me the inspiration to come to Rhode Island and do what we do here, trying to figure out what ants we have in Rhode Island and in New England, and what are their interesting behaviors and physiological patterns. This is just an acorn. It had a cap. We pulled the cap off. Um, when you look for acorn ants, one of the things you do is you find acorns like this on the forest floor, and you see if you can open them up, or you can't really knock in the door and see who's inside. Um, so we were able to get a peek inside this one without opening it, and I'm gonna try to like open the rest of the acorn. I apologize if my fingers are in the way, but I don't know what's inside. So maybe we'll
Uh,
just delete all of this if there's nothing inside.
yeah, it's science in action,
Yeah,
right?
let's see.
Oh, wow.
So this was just like under like a little piece of the acorn. I think you can tell that there's like larger black winged ants
Right.
and the smaller yellow Temnothorax curvus spinosus under there. The larger black winged ants are the kidnapping species.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
the new queens that will go and make a new colony. It's that time of the year where ants go through mating flights. And so we see that species and the parasitized workers of the other species. I bet that there's more ants in here. Oops.
That's crazy. How did you suspect that that was happening in this acorn?
Um, we saw one worker. We saw
Uh,
as we peeked inside the acorn, we saw two different colored ants pop out. Like even
gotcha.
before we'd like pulled away much of the acorn's shells, we could see like a yellow ant walking on the acorn and a black ant, and
Um,
we're looking at it. Like these are the parasitized little yellow Temnothorax curvispinosus workers and their captors, the black colored ants that are Temnothorax americanus, is their species. That species used to be called Protomygnathus, maybe Protomygnathus americanus, but for the darker colored, slightly larger ants, I think you can see that there are ones that don't have wings. So those are the workers that will do periodic raids to find new babies for their nest. In
that
some
is
of the
wild.
species that do this kind of raiding behavior, the queen ants or the worker ants of the parasitizing species, the darker colored ones here, those ants can't necessarily even feed their own young. Like, they don't have mouth parts that can chew food. They might have mouth parts that are sort of sickle-shaped, just good enough to go and steal babies from some other species' nest, bring those babies back, and take advantage of their labor, use needing those babies to do the work of milling food and feeding food to their own babies.
That is
Um,
wild. How would they have evolved like that? I mean, and is it purely parasitic on the acorn ants where, like, I mean, obviously they don't get any benefit from this, but is it
yeah,
a
yeah.
have their populations dwindled or, or have they just kind of stably been
I
parasitized
think
over this?
I'm not an expert on this system. That I have actually like only found these ants 2 or 3 times ever.
Mm,
So super exciting to see such a big nest of them. I think we find the parasitizing species where the acorn ants are abundant,
mm,
and
that makes
and
sense.
there's 3 or 4 species of acorn dwelling temnothorax ants and other species that live in acorns also. But parasitism is rampant in the across the animal kingdom. People who estimate the number of species of wasps say that their number is grossly underestimated because for every species of insect out there, potentially millions of species, there is another wasp species that has evolved to parasitize that one other insect species, and then there's parasitoids that go after the parasites. Um, it it isn't like, the most delightful
Right.
story in evolutionary
Yeah.
biology, but it does seem to be a successful strategy. Yeah, it's like maybe worth mentioning is that there's an effort to pay attention to the words we use when we describe systems in ecology and in evolutionary biology, and the words we use can affect how we think. The words we use can affect the science we do, the way we interact with the public support for that science. And historically, this behavior that we're watching with these ants, the interaction between them ecologically, has been called slave making.
Mm.
And that language persists pretty much in every authoritative reference you can find, despite the fact that this isn't slavery. This isn't, I mean, our human institution of it, in any way. Really, it is an example of biological parasitism.
Right.
It involves, to some extent, maybe we could use the word kidnapping, or pirating, or just really just stealing the brood from another colony, and that becomes like, as we remove the humanizing human history language, it actually becomes a more accurate description. Uh,
Right.
right, with the larger black ants in this acorn here, they don't have a power system that they're imposing on
Right.
the yellow acorn ant workers. It isn't like a cultural process. There are examples of rebellion of the parasitized species in the literature, which is fun, but that doesn't mean that it's slave making. Um, and attempts to change the language are very slow. People have suggested other words. Uh, Kleptotechnic is a fun one, referring to stealing and crafty behavior. Um, a lot of the other words, there's a scientific word that's very common. It's called delosis, which is just referencing the Greek word for slavery, so it doesn't actually change the word.
Mhm. Right.
But it it's also the case that we then, like, if we're interested in studying ants and love ant behavior and studying, learning about them, then you can fall into the trap of telling people how excited you are about slave making ants, and that's a horrifying thing,
Right.
to some of us, and
Right.
not everyone, and a lot of people have made their peace with that language, but I don't think we should. I think we should try to describe the parasitic behavior, like, precisely and scientifically. Um, and I'm absolutely open to lots of different types of language choices. We were talking about needle ants earlier. We're working on an effort with the Entomological Society of America to remove the prefix Asian from the Asian needle ant. There are no other needle ants out there, and this is the only one in the headlines getting a lot of bad press. Even like incorrectly because they don't have a
Right,
bad
right,
thing, but
right,
we don't need to spread fear and hate, especially towards other human groups, because we're working with ants.
right.
That just seems wrong.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, I think
so
it's so important. And you talk about science communication, it is so important the language that you use in terms of just how people understand the ants and also themselves. One thing that I thought was really interesting is you have a column that you do on ants in the city. And I took a view at some of the articles, and just really interesting how you kind of make commentary on like social events happening or social interactions, the way that humans interacting kind of make some, parallels between ants and humans and how maybe it's the same, but how maybe it's different, right? And I think that's such a lovely way to use like getting people curious about the biology, but also using it to learn more about ourselves. And I was going to ask you the question is like, what can we learn about ourselves through ants and vice versa, right? Like, what can they
yeah,
teach us in your view?
when I was a graduate student, I was at Arizona State, and Bert Holdobler was on faculty there at the time, and he's the famous ant researcher. Uh, and Bert did two things that I thought were hilarious. I mean, scientifically brilliant person, no doubt. But at every department seminar that we had, so it could be a talk about marine ecology or bivalves or, paleobiology. Any talk, he always was one of the first people to ask a question, and always asked about ants, always connected that
Uh,
person's like very sophisticated, technical, specialized biology research. He made a connection to ants, and by asking a question about ants, I think he would help to push them further in their field, and also made their work more relevant to those of us in the audience, like studying ants. I thought that was like a fun quirk that he did. He also was asked once, or I think many times, what can we learn, or what is different about human society and ant society, and what can we learn from them? And he was always quick to remark that ants get rid of their males very fast.
uh.
Male ants have wings generally, and they fly and they mate, and that's the end of the story for males in ant society. And so he doesn't generally suggest we, just to be clear, he's like,
Yeah.
maybe we shouldn't follow the path of the ants, but ants are so abundant. They're absolutely abundant. They're under the ground everywhere we go. They're not super species rich. There are probably 100 times more, maybe 200 times more beetle species than ant species
Interesting.
on the planet. Um, but ants themselves, by their biomass, are way more abundant. And so it means there's fewer species. We can get to know them in a way that would be hard to get to know all of the beetles. And then I think we can, sort of recognize them where we go and what kind of ants and what sort of life histories, and what sort of stories they might be telling us. And then sort of think about our own society and what sort of stories are there within the city, what's happening as far as elections and struggle for freedoms and liberties and voting and decision making. Those are things ants do, and so we can relate to them, and maybe use that lens to sort of look back on our own choices and how we interact with each other.
Yeah. No, that's super cool. Well, I was
Thanks.
gonna ask you a little bit about because something that you have on your website that you talk about was one of your uh, aspects of study is this metabolic scaling. Like,
Hmm.
what is that?
Ah,
Yeah.
so as we get bigger, we use less energy pound for pound. And so that's a pattern humans show. Lions,
Mm.
ants, whales, even unicellular organisms, there is this scaling law. It's a nonlinear power law relationship that we can predict an organism's metabolic rate, the amount of energy it uses to stay alive based on its mass, raised to an exponent that's less than one, usually really close to about 2/3 or 3/4. And the fact that there's this enormous diversity of life that I'm putting under this umbrella, and we can find a single equation that predicts, you know, thousands of different life history stories and developmental trajectories, ways of living, places of living, latitude. It's absolutely independent of all of those things. And we can predict that your energy is two things, is not just proportional to your mass. It's not like you get 10 times bigger, you use 10 times as much energy. It's not
Right.
proportional. We're going to get 10 times bigger and we're going to use maybe 4 or 5 times as much energy. And so we've got this really interesting, the nature of the relationship is interesting, and the fact that it's almost, I don't want to say universal because there's always exceptions, but it's found across such a wide diversity of life suggests that there should be an answer. There should be an answer somewhere in the workings of our cells or the interactions between ants that explains why we use the amount of energy that we use. And the we there is like everything.
Right.
We don't know the answer. It's not in our textbooks. We haven't discovered it yet. It's a pattern that holds up for individual organisms, obviously, really, really well. And in graduate school, the work I did helped show that ant colonies show the same pattern. That as the colony gets bigger, the amount of energy used by each individual ant goes down. And so, and then the colony is scaling, its metabolic rate increased with size. It's the same like nonlinear pattern that we ourselves show. Others, scientists have shown it in bees, even marine colonial bryozoans show this pattern. There are some estimates. Louise Betancourt has a few papers in PNAS talking about the scaling of energy use in human cities.
Mm.
It's fun to think about. In my maybe elder millennial generation, we have this like vision that we're all going to go off and homestead in the woods and be sustainable and at peace with nature and making all the right decisions. But actually, it's much more energetically efficient to stay in New York City. Like in New York City, just a little bit of infrastructure goes a long way. You know, a
Right.
road, a subway, a utility conduit. A little bit of that infrastructure can then reduce the costs on everyone. Whereas if I'm alone or, with my family, even in the woods, we have to dig our own well. We have to like drive over a dirt road. We have to like have our own fire that isn't heating any of the houses or people around us. And so I'm not trying to say there's a mechanistic link between the
Right.
scaling pattern of energy use in animals and the scaling pattern of energy use in people. For sure, it's a lot easier to study the energy that we use because we can measure gas and road size, and we can measure the behaviors that people are doing a lot easier than we can say how the cells in my liver are coordinating with my skin cells and my brain cells to all have this like integrated scaling pattern as I get bigger. But so we've shown that the scaling pattern is real for ants. We've shown that it's very much an effective size. That when we reduce the size of the colony in half, now we're dealing with a smaller colony. The individual ants in that colony use more energy than they did 1 hour before when they were in a bigger
Interesting.
colony. And so that means the ants are somehow sensitive to their size. The size of the colony, I mean. And that means the cells in our body are sensitive to the size of the bodies that those cells find themselves in also. And, it suggests to me that there are communication mechanisms at play. There's
Right.
a communication network within the colony that's helping the colony stay attuned to what's going on and how big it is. And there are communication mechanisms at play between cells that are helping the cells know how big we are, what they should be doing at any given time. At least that's, my speculation. We have
Right.
not worked out all of those pathways yet.
No, that's super interesting. Does that mean like, where do you get that threshold though of like, is it always just better? Is using less energy always better? So you just get bigger and
Oh,
bigger and bigger, right?
it's
Like,
super fascinating question. So when I have classes, we teach physiology and gen bio and some metabolic ecology here, and we have instruments for people to measure their own metabolic rates. And so student will measure 1,400 kilocalories per day or 2,300 kilocalories a day. And something that I've been noticing is everybody always wants to know what the right answer is.
right.
Like, is that good? Right?
Right.
Like, we have like relatively like standardized metrics for things like blood sugar. or
Right.
body temperature or blood pressure, right? There's relatively narrow ranges that we homeostatically regulate at. And everyone wants to know if their body's metabolic rate is in that, are we okay?
Right.
That is not what our instrumentation tells us, right? Our instrumentation tells us how much heat your body is putting off right now. That's basically all it does. It's how much energy are you transforming from the food we eat and liberating out to the environment. That changes as we grow. It changes with our activity. Someone who has an incredibly high metabolic rate, but is also eating a lot of food and like growing a lot of muscle, everything could be absolutely perfect for that person. And someone who has a really, really low mass specific metabolic rate, but maybe is more sedentary, maybe isn't growing, that could also be absolutely good in theory. Um, Quantifying it helps us to put more of the picture together for ourselves. There is so much inter-individual variation. As much as humans still show the scaling pattern, there is a lot of metabolic inter-individual variation. And, we all probably have slightly different hormonal set points for how high or low or how fast or slow our metabolisms are, and what the different triggers are. Whether those are things in our hormone cycles, things in our diet, stress levels, social interactions, those can all affect our metabolic rates. And so, you know, what I've encouraged my students to think about is not so much as that one number like itself, good or bad, but could we put that number in the context of, the rest of your daily energetic budget, or
Right.
look at how that number changes over time. Um, you know,
Right. It just occurred to me, I mean, I suppose that means maybe the ideal size of the colony depends upon what resources there are, right? If there's lots, then you maybe could be smaller, but if less, maybe you get a bigger colony.
yeah, that's also like a huge unknown at the moment. I think, yeah, no. So like a colony that has a high metabolic rate, higher than expected or higher than other ants, how do we make sense of that relative to other ants? We really need to know another piece of the puzzle. We need to know, what are they doing with that energy?
Mm.
You know, are they could be, the whole colony could be absolutely stationary, but they could have a lot of brood that are growing, and that could be a
Mhm.
very expensive
Right.
cost that the colony is taking on. Or there could be pathogen loads. And so without
Uh,
knowing, like, we understand the amount of energy going into this system. We don't know the amount of energy that the ants are doing, that they're putting out, and that they're benefiting from in some way. So that's sort of my holy grail, like metabolically speaking, is to sort of understand both of those to see if we don't know, for example, in the largest colonies that have very low mass specific metabolic rates, are they more or less productive than the smaller colonies? Like, are they doing more with less,
mm.
or are they just doing less?
Uh,
And that's possible, right? We looked
uh,
at that acorn ant colony, and they were mostly
right.
asleep. You know? And so
Yeah.
if they become more mostly asleep as their colony size increases, then that makes perfect sense.
Right.
It's showing us that we have a better understanding of the different components of the system and how they're increasing the size.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
Well, to kinda, wrap up a little bit, since we're I could talk to you forever about ants, but, yeah, I mean, is there anything that I guess is particularly challenging for you at the moment, or, something that you're working through, and then alternatively, something that you're hopeful for in the future with regards to your research or generally ants?
Uh, there's so many different ways to think about answers to that question. I'd say it there's been severe cuts to National Science Foundation funding. There are changes that have been proposed to make the scientific work we do um, fall under purely political review. It's horrifying. I have benefited so much from the federal government for support for my research as an undergraduate, as a graduate student, postdoc, faculty member. And I don't think, but something I think the government, people in the government, and maybe even at large, realize is that investments in the sort of scientific work we do, they're not just investments in science. Science is a way of knowing the world. We do experiments, we make observations, we report them. We don't generally profit from those. By and large, we try to increase the amount of things that we know and get that information out to people. But that is super valuable, but it's itself just like a small sliver of what it means to be a scientist and a member of the scientific community. I think a huge part of what we do is we grow that community. We form relationships. I've benefited so much from the mentoring of the professors who took me on as a kid who was a math major in college and hadn't studied biology at all yet when I got to graduate school. That's not
I was
entirely,
gonna ask,
but it's
yeah.
like basically true. And I've benefited so much from the cohort of graduate students that I went to school with. And, we build these networks, mutual support networks, um, networks that extend now to my students and the staff that we get to work with here on campus and members of the community. We get to work with the Rhode Island Mycological Association, like talk to them about what they're doing. We get to work with the Rhode Island Natural History Survey. And if in 2 weeks, we're going up to Cambridge for the Cambridge Moth Ball, and we'll get to talk to people in Cambridge about bugs and the people we'll interact with can be little kids, they can be old kids, from all walks of life. And it's this work, it's the scientific work, the day job part of it that makes all of that possible. And once we get rid of that, like if the funding that enables this kind of research gets removed, we lose all of that sort of social investment in our communities and
Right.
strengthening partnerships, being able to provide educational opportunities for people. I mean, of course, we lose the science too, which is horrible. But it's there are a lot of different pieces to the kind of work we do. It's we were at the BioBlitz
Yeah.
2 summers ago when we met Manuela, her friend Nayab, who were art students at their, out there with us and a couple of hundred other people, just trying to figure out who all the different sorts of animals and plants and fungi were in this one little spot in Rhode Island. And it was the most delightful event. And we found ants that we'd never found in Rhode Island before. We did contribute to our local biodiversity, which is important for monitoring and understanding the environments that we live in, the changes those communities could be encountering. But we also got to meet Manuela and Nayab, and
Right.
Nayab shared stories about ants and spirituality from her culture, and Manuela has done some really incredible art, and helped people to see ants in a different light and maybe see themselves in different light through the art that she does with ants. And like those sorts of interactions are the best. That's why we're here. It's
Right.
why I'm here and why I want to keep doing this kind of work.
Yeah, I think you're getting at, yeah, something so important in science communication, like the people that, yeah, in my job and career, like we think about some people, think about maybe that's the most important part, right? Is translating the science, is getting people to understand the science. But yeah, and talking to Manuela and so many of these things, it's like it goes beyond, yeah, just understanding. I mean, she had this story of like seeing that how they look for moths, right, with like a white sheet at night and the
Mhm.
flashlights and everyone kind of sitting around, and how much that was very much just like this community event. She was like, it's so beautiful. It's like she wanted to create art just kind of, yeah, to symbolize like what was happening in that moment of like humans coming together. And that's, yeah, it goes beyond just the science.
Blacklighting is so much fun, but it requires people to set up the black light. It requires equipment. It requires some investment. People who know the things that might be coming to the sheet to help like share that knowledge with other people. And so, right, we benefited from David Gregg and Kyra Stillwell at Rhode Island Natural History Survey, who organize this event every year and bring all of us together so that
Right.
we can all learn from each other in the process. Um, and you never know what's gonna come to the sheet. There
Right.
can be, like, incredible things. We were just in Maine, and we saw the most beautiful moths at, a pride camp up in Maine, and that was so much fun. And yeah, I don't the Cambridge Moth Ball, like, ends a little earlier than we'd like. Sometimes, like, the best moths don't come out until much later, but there'll be people dressed in costumes, and there'll be
That's so
photographers, and it'll be a fun community, educational and sort of almost spiritual community gathering.
right, right, right.
Yeah,
That's yeah. I love that so much.
thanks.
Yeah. But yeah, is there anything you're particularly excited about? I was gonna ask what your favorite ant was, but but you probably can't say a favorite, but
The acorn ants are really sweet.
they are, yeah.
Acorn ants are sweet. The needle ants are definitely. I have a tattoo of the needle ants right here, and it's a tattoo of the two ants doing the vibe check interaction. That was the vibe check that was named by Dearlies, and then an art bio double major Maddie drew illustrations of the different like components of the interaction. And so Dearlies and I both went and got tattoos of the vibe check.
That's amazing.
It's the only ant I have tattooed so far. So
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's really cool. Something that came up, just through looking from your lab website is how much, and you did mention just the fact that it is an undergraduate research institution. I mean, you do, I mean, from my perspective, you do a lot of research for being undergraduate institution. Like you're quite productive in your research, and then the fact that like you bring all this art and like other things in. I mean, do you think that's something that Providence College is being there has allowed you to do more? Like, I don't know. I find that interacting with undergraduate researchers, they have this like passion. Like they haven't they haven't experienced maybe like the loss and depression of graduate school
yeah.
yet. That there's like when I talk to undergraduate research students about their projects, they're just so excited. And I feel like that passion must come through like back to inspiring you. But
Oh, it absolutely does. I think PUIs, primarily undergrad institutions, sometimes get a bad rap for not
right.
being more research
Right.
intense. Providence College takes teaching very seriously. Absolutely, we have high teaching loads, but tenure and promotion at a school like PC, and I think many others, here at PC and many other schools like us, is primarily research productivity based. And faculty at PUIs may need research grants, may need papers published, conference presentations, all very traditional components of demonstrating scholarly productivity. Um, we benefit from having a nice small department. I have lots of other colleagues here that it's fun to collaborate with. Um, and But unlike at a larger institution, I'm here. I'm here right now in the lab taking care of
Right.
these ants and
Right.
feeding these ants. And we'll have more students once the semester starts back up again. But I found that like PUI faculty, like those of us here, we have to be a lot more hands-on with the research.
Right.
And if you love the research you're doing, that's great.
Right. Right. Right.
You know, so I'm very happy to. We're going up to Maine to do a field course about ants at the Eagle Hill Institute in Maine for a week, and we're tracing a new ant species in Maine. Um, uh, it's an ant that maybe has never been on the continent before, maybe once in Canada. I'm not gonna share any other secrets about it at the moment. But we found it, and we want to know what it's doing there. And I think it came from Europe, which is an odd place for an invasive or introduced species to sort of show up from. And so we're gonna try to make connections to more community members in Maine to understand more about that ant. And Maine is huge, so there's a lot of surveying to do. But that's an exciting thing on the horizon for us.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. I really appreciate it, and I've been loving just having the ants as like a backdrop to the conversation is so wonderful.
Oh, that's awesome.
I just keep
Thanks,
wanting to
Paige.
watch them. So thank you so
I mean,
much.
wherever you are, you can in fact go find an acorn and then pick it up and take a look and see who's inside. I don't think you have to feel too bad. These ants are really good. They're sometimes called house hunting ants. If you mess up their acorn, they will find another. So but yeah, hopefully you get to say hi to some sometime soon.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Paige.